Senator from Wisconsin.
President, with regard to amendment number 3913, the one about which the chairman just spoke, the so-called reverse targeting amendment that I've offered, again, reverse targeting is what happens when the government wiretaps persons overseas when what they're really interested in is the Americans with whom these foreigners are talking. Now, I think most of my colleagues would agree that this bill should not open up a back door to get around the requirement in FISA for a warrant to listen in on Americans at home. The lack of any substantive arguments against my amendment is made clear by the letter that the DNI sent Tuesday, and in fact the arguments just offered by the chairman were almost identical to the arguments offered by the DNI and by the letters sent by the Attorney General. In fact, the letter, which severely mischaracterizes the amendment, actually underscores why the amendment is good both for civil liberties and for national security. First, the letter confirms that reverse targeting is not, in fact, prohibited by the underlying bill. You keep hearing the chairman and the vice chairman saying it's already prohibited. It's not. The DNI writes that the Intelligence Committee bill only prohibits warrantless collection when the American is, quote, the actual target, unquote. Mr. President, that cannot be read as a prohibition on reverse targeting. That's just a prohibition on direct targeting of an American at home. And it does nothing to protect Americans from what the DNI himself has said is unconstitutional. Second, the letter cites, quote, operational uncertainties and problems, unquote, but it doesn't bother to identify what those are. Yes, my amendment would require new procedures, just like everything else in this bill, but the government should already have procedures to protect the constitutional rights of Americans, and if it doesn't, that's all the more reason to pass the amendment. Third, the letter actually makes one of the strongest arguments in favor of my amendment when it warns of insufficient attention to the American end of an international terrorist communication. If a foreign terrorist is talking to an American inside the United States, the intelligence community should go get a FISA warrant on that American so it can listen in on all of his communications. And it should and certainly would have no problem getting that warrant. Without that warrant, the government will never get the full picture of what that American is doing or plotting. Yet the DNI's letter seems to argue that the government would not want to get a FISA court warrant to listen in on all the communications, including the domestic communications of a terrorist inside the United States. I do not believe this is a serious argument. But if it were, it would suggest that our government is not doing everything it can do to track down terrorists. Finally, the letter seriously mischaracterizes the amendment. Mr. President, the amendment does not bar collection of communications between terrorists overseas and their associates in the United States. It does not in any way affect the government's ability to discover and collect those communications. It does not apply to incidental collection of communications into the United States. And it does not even apply when the government has identified a known individual with whom the foreign terrorist is communicating. Only, Mr. President, only when a significant purpose of the surveillance is to get information on a person inside the United States, only then does the government need to get a court warrant. Now, that is not just required by the Constitution of the United States. It is how the government can most efficiently and effectively protect us. So I hope my colleagues will support this modest proposal to prevent these new powers from opening up a huge loophole to the requirement in FISA that the government get a court order to target Americans in the United States. With that, Mr. President, I reserve the balance of my time on that amendment, and I yield the floor.